are going to focus on question and answer session. An academic conference is not complete without a question and answer session, which is also called Q&A session. As a questioner, you can get more information, clarify confusions, and get inspiration for your own work. As a speaker, you have spent several hours preparing that 20-minute paper presentation, but the effort that goes into answering queries about your paper is as important as writing and presenting the paper. The Q&A session provides an opportunity for fellow academics to critique your work, and in return, you are expected to show that you know what you are talking about. In addition, it forces you to think on your feet, as you are likely to face a few unexpected questions. In this session, we will learn how to invite questions, raise questions, especially 4 types of questions, and respond to different types of questions. When you finish your presentation, you can invite questions like this.
So, let's throw it open to questions. Now, I'd like to answer any questions if you have any. Now, I'm ready to answer your questions if any. I'd be glad to try and answer any questions. Are there any questions? Any questions?
If you are audience, you can ask the speaker a question in this way.
I want to ask Dr. Green a question. I have a question for Dr. Anderson. Mr. Smith, I have a question to ask you. There is a question I'd like to ask Professor Lee. A question for Mr. Liu. One question, Dr. Wei. Could I ask you a question, Professor Lee? May I venture to ask Professor Zhang a question?
Specifically, there are 4 types of questions. Questions for clarify problems, for showing special interests, for raising different opinions, and for information hunting. If you want to clarify a problem, you can say,
I don't quite understand what you really mean by saying. Can you explain it again? I would like to ask you a question, or rather, make a request. Is it possible for you to show me again your last slide?
If you would like to show special interest in the work, you can say,
I'm very much interested in hearing your presentation today, since the work we are going to start has some connections with yours. Now, would you please say a few more words about particularly at its preliminary stage? Dr. Johnson, I was fascinated by your description of your study, but what will happen if
you want to raise a different opinion, you may say,
perhaps we are looking at the problem from different viewpoints. To the best of my knowledge, what you say seems to be theoretically unclear in, for example, could you give us further explanation on that aspect? I'm very interested in hearing your presentation on the positive analysis of this efficient market hypothesis. But to the best of my knowledge, your viewpoint that seems to be unreasonable. I'm afraid that. Could you give us further explanation on that aspect?
If you'd like to hunt more information, you can ask,
would you be so kind as to give me more information about the method of your experiment? As you mentioned in your talk, you are making the experiments on. I'm not specialized in this subject, but I'm sure it will involve a rather complicated technological process. Would you mind telling us more about that?
Then, how to respond to different types of questions? First, you need to hear the question clearly. You can confirm it by saying,
Are you saying, you mean, what was the last point, please? Sorry, I didn't catch that. Would you clarify that for me? I think that's a very good question, but could you please be more specific? Sorry, I don't know what you mean by the word.
It would be polite to welcome the question.
This is a very good question. Thank you for that question. I'm glad this question has been brought up. I appreciate that question. That is an interesting question.
To answer the question, you may repeat the previous remarks.
To answer your question, I will just repeat what I said in my talk. Concerning this point, I think I have touched on it in my speech. To answer your question, I'd like to repeat the third point of what I have just said just now. Well, I was saying, if you are interested in, I would suggest you look them up in my manuscript on page 7, which have been shown in my presentation.
You may answer the question partially.
Since time is limited, I think I can only answer part of your questions. One of the questions you put forward is about, which I think is very interesting, and now I'd like to answer the question with, all right, I'll now say a few words about my future consideration on the subject, and I think that might be the answer to your last question.
If you encounter a challenging question, you can respond like this.
I'm afraid that our different views on that point may come from the different angles from which we are looking at the problem. Well, judging from your question, I can see that your understanding of my viewpoints seems to be somewhat different from my original intention. Our study has not come to the end. If you agree, I will answer your question later. I think it will be possible to answer this question when more experiments are completed.
You are also likely to face a question you don't know. You can just say frankly that you can't answer, or pass it to another participant who you are sure can answer it.
I'm sorry. I don't happen to know the answer to that question, but I'll be happy to check into it for you. I'm sorry. I don't think I can answer your question. I wish I could answer your question, but unfortunately, I have no good answer. I'm not sure that I can answer your question. What I'm going to say is not quite an answer to your question. I think your question can be better answered by Professor Lee.
If you are asked an improper question, you can refuse to answer it.
I appreciate your interest in my research, but I just don't want to talk about it now. Let's talk about something else. I'd rather not say. Why do you want to know?
After you answer the question, you can refer back to the questioner.
Did I answer your question? Did I answer you satisfactorily? I don't know whether this answered your question. I hope this may serve as an answer to Dr. Lee.
Now, let's watch a video clip of the Q&A session.
Again, thank you for your time. I know it's our break, but I'm really happy to take any questions, or moderator, you tell me how you want to handle the questions, but I'm here. Thank you.
I think we have enough time for one or two quick questions for Dr. Dente, if anybody would like to raise some.
Mark, you've given some very nice examples of how better data can help aid treatment decisions in ways which will save money in the context of examples like preventable readmissions. One of the things that I've struggled with is this question of what are goals should be, because there are lots of examples like that where clearly we can achieve better quality and spend less money. But there are also huge problems with underutilization of beneficial treatments. And when you look at problems like medication adherence or use of various types of services, a lot of these probably are cost effective, but higher utilization is not going to save money. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, because I think we have to be careful on not setting goals that will lead us down a path where a lot of beneficial treatments won't be used because they don't save money if we've set that up as the metric.
Perfect question, by the way, and absolutely spot on. So the examples I happened to pull for a 30-minute lecture were kind of fun ones. We're in violent agreement with you. And in fact, in the world of accountable care organizations, you cannot be out there to try to shortchange for the near term, because now you're in the population health management business, right, in this brave new world of accountable care. This same data will absolutely pick up underutilization, and it should. And there are times when you have to make sure you're doing the right treatment at the right time, whatever the resource. And by the way, the cost wasn't the driver. The cost was just a byproduct. The driver was, how did we prevent the readmission? How do we make sure this patient had a better outcome? The byproduct of all of this was, gee, it happened to save money. But your question is absolutely spot on. And in fact, the same data warehouse can make sure that we have and we are doing the appropriate utilization. So great question.
In this session, we learned how to ask and answer different types of questions in a Q&A session. Actually, there is no strict formula for handling questions and answers, as the best preparation happens during the time of the session. Just remember to be polite, pleasant, and generous. Next time, we will talk about visual aids for academic presentation. See you soon!